Hi everyone, welcome to this session where I'm very glad to say that I'm happy to have my student Aashna Shukla with me. Aashna is part of a very unique group of MBA aspirants because she has aced both CAT and XAT, and that's a very exclusive group, I can say. She has done extremely well in both the exams, and she has selections to the IIMs, she has selection to XLRI. So, Aashna, a lot of things you're playing around with now. Basket of selections: the IIM Kozhikode, IIM Shillong, CAP IIMs, XLRI. So windfall, right?
It feels a little overwhelming, to be honest, because when I started preparing, a lot of people also told me that, as a fresher, you might not get so many opportunities because work counts for a lot. And I remember I spoke to you about that, and you told me to cut the noise and just work hard. So,
Absolutely. You are a fresher, fresh out of college, finished your final year exams just last week. So, having
yes,
done
sir.
fashion technology from NIFT Delhi and a lot of exposure being in the capital city, when did this thought about doing an MBA, taking management as your career, blossom?
Right. So, I come from a fashion production background. Fashion technology is essentially learning how a garment is constructed for the mass market. So, when I learned that, I realized I was a very technical skill. And right from the first year, as a class, I think we were aware that the next step would be management. But what really was a deciding factor for me was that we also got to take minors, like departments, during college, and mine was fashion management. So it dealt a lot with fashion marketing, and that's when I realized that I actually have an inkling towards that, and I really enjoy it. And I decided to pursue my master's in an MBA.
You have a passion for marketing, and this is something which we have discussed. So, when did you start preparing? Because the marketing element will come in later in our discussion, doesn't it? So, so when did you start preparing, and how did you manage things along with your college?
So I decided that I wanted to take CAT. Seriously, decided that in the September of the year before I had to appear for the exam. So 2020, I decided. But I was really occupied with college, and I was also the president of the culture club of college. So there wasn't a lot of time even after college hours because we were so occupied. And before I realized it, it was already July of the year that I had to take CAT, and I hadn't even started preparing. And that's when I think by a stroke of luck that my mother got in touch with you. And I essentially started preparing when those DILR classes started because that's when I finally got the momentum going. And I was able to also segregate time for quant and sort of analyze what my strengths and weaknesses were and work on them accordingly.
How did you juggle with your time? Because this is something which happens to a lot of freshers. They get into preparation, and then they find that there's exams coming in, and there are assignments, and obviously all the other extracurriculars. And when you are having a position of responsibility with a lot of events happening in your college, so how did you manage all those things? Multitasking skills, right? Very essential for management.
I think I would be lying if I say that I did not have at least 3 meltdowns in the process. But so one advantage that we had as a batch was that at least the initial part of our classes all happened online due to COVID, and eventually, subsequently, everything did go offline towards the end. But for a large part of that period, things were online. So after college hours, I wasn't traveling much, and there wasn't a lot of fatigue based on just activities that were cut short because of COVID. So I was able to utilize the nighttime for studies. And also, I think, again, the advantage that I got because of that was I was able to wake up a little later. So I wasn't constantly feeling like I had too much on my plate because of that. But there were days. And one thing that I was doing was, and again, advice, very sound advice that I got from you was to not look at CAT as a paper where you have to solve a lot of sums or constantly keep working hard or just focusing on the numbers, but instead consistently practice and just look at your progress. And that's what I was doing. I wasn't looking at punching in 8 hours a day or 9 hours a day, but I was giving myself targets that I needed to complete a topic or maybe a mock test for that particular week or that particular day, and then go on based on that.
One thing which I really appreciate during your process was that you had your schedule, and I've seen you stick to it. And querying, asking questions, analyzing things, and that's something which comes naturally to you, I think, because you always ask questions and how does it work, and things like what can be the kind of cutoffs for this kind of a paper. And you had your own numbers. We used to
Right.
discuss the mocks, and at the end of the mock, the question was like, what do you think the cutoff was? And then we would discuss what the actual cutoffs, and
Right.
you started coming out with numbers which were like spot on. So that actually shows the kind of analytical things. You are actually sort of reviewing papers, and there's something which we should do. It's not just taking marks, but then reviewing and looking at pitfalls and trying to improve them. So that's something which you
Right.
did very well.
And sir, I think one very instrumental thing in that was not really focusing entirely on mocks, but also focusing more on the actual past papers, because then they were also able to give us a very realistic view of what the cutoffs were, which mocks aren't. I remember one of the mocks that I took, I think I got a 67 percentile, and I was so upset about it because it was really low. And that was very close to the actual CAT exam. So I was also a little demotivated, but then finally CAT happened and I scored a lot better than that. So I think one advice that I would have for anybody is that don't go by the numbers on the mocks, because they are very discouraging in terms of percentiles.
Correct. The past papers really help, isn't it? And that's something which every CAT aspirant should do, because that's what Aashna did. And when we discuss that in class, that's the real paper. Correct. And there's something
Right.
which has actually happened in the past, and so you look at cutoffs, and that looks a lot more realistic to what it can be on the D-Day.
Right. And I remember one thing that you always kept telling us was that the paper that you see on the D-Day is the most difficult CAT paper that has ever been. So also took that with a grain of salt and just prepared myself mentally for that.
There's always this feeling that, past is past, but then my CAT paper on this day is going to be the
Yes,
paper.
sir.
So there's always this hype. Like last year it says, IIM Ahmedabad is preparing the paper, so it has to be something out of the world kind of. And it's just a normal paper any other IIM prepares. So why is this all this hype? So when we look at CAT 2022, the aspirants will say that is going to be the toughest. And, it'll follow in the future also. CAT 2023 people, for them, that is the most important paper. So there's a lot of hype, but cut out the hype and look at your preparation.
Right. And also, when you look at the papers retrospectively, a year that you didn't appear for CAT, you think, oh, this is so simple. And then you look at your own paper and you think mine was so much tougher. But then, of course, that's all just a bias.
And then after this huge build-up for CAT, and then CAT happened and you did well. And once you did well, then, and you know that you've done well, it is very difficult to then retain that same kind of enthusiasm for an exam like XAT, which happens almost a month and a half later. But you kept going and you did very well. So how did you prepare for particularly the DM section, which probably was a decider?
So I remember that 2 months, 3 months before that, I was completely focused on CAT. I did not even look at that as a paper at that point. And I suppose that's what happens with everybody. And I remember in passing you mentioning it a couple of times that there is a DM section and that is very different. But I had no experience with it and I had no idea how to approach it. And then there were, as you had shared with us, a few guidelines that had to be followed, I remember there was always be truthful, don't take bribes, no matter what your personal situation is, don't let it affect the corporate situation, and don't hide things from upper management, and a lot of basic ground rules that needed to be followed for the DM section. And one pivotal thing I remember was whatever you feel personally you might actually do, and what may seem like the greater good is not the most practical solution or the most on paper correct solution. And so you need to go by, you possibly need to go against your instincts and go by what is correct on paper while solving that particular section. And I just want to mention that when the paper happened, when the ZAT paper happened, then after which all the institutions started releasing their own keys before the official key came out, According to them, I was scoring somewhere in the 80 percentiles in the DM section, and they were scoring me a lot lesser than what I expected. And then the actual result came out, and I had a 99.6 in that section. So also just trusting yourself more than you trust institutes is something that I would
Correct.
advise.
So what we prepared on finally worked, isn't it? So,
Yes, sir.
so there's a small takeaway from that. And the learning is that shut out all the external noise and believe in
Right,
yourself.
absolutely.
Two different exams, CAT and XAT. And if you look at, for example, the verbal content or content which is not related to quant, XAT has something like about 63% of the paper, which is
Right.
non-quant, whereas in CAT it is something like about 37%, because I'm attaching DI also to the quant part in
Right.
CAT. So the two exams are different in that sense, particularly also the DM paper and all that. So how do you look at these two exams having aced both?
So for CAT, I knew, even for that matter, I knew that quant was not my strongest suit. And something that I was inherently good at was language and the verbal aspect of it. So for that, I always only focused on mocks and, more importantly, actual papers. That's how I prepared. I didn't spend a lot of time preparing those. For LRDI, of course, I had your guidance, and that was a game changer for me. And I say that to everybody.
Thank you.
And quant also, because I knew it wasn't something that I was inherently very good at, I wanted to first get my basics in order. So that is something that I started in July. I think July to September, all I did was arithmetics and geometry, because that was the foundation. And from past papers, I knew that that was a large chunk of the paper as well. So that is something that I worked on. And I think my first goal while preparing for quant was to clear the cutoff comfortably and not really aim very high. And again, for that, because there was so much weight on DM and language, that helped me. And I was able to focus more on that. And for that, because I had already prepared a lot for CAT, that 1 month that I had between CAT and ZAT, most of my preparation was based on the DM section of that.
So how was your interview? Quick summary of your general interview experiences. Like, what does it cover and was it different?
So they were all also very different from each other. I remember there were some interviews that didn't go well at all, because they expected me to know very technical information. Because so in NIFT we also have some elective subjects, and I had taken machine learning and R coding. And of course, what I knew was very rudimentary because it was from NIFT. And then they started asking me very technical questions based on it, which I couldn't answer. So there were those interviews also. But most of my interviews, they focused more on what my industry was doing, what the government was doing for my industry, and my internship. So because I did not have work experience, my internships became a very pivotal aspect of my interviews. And they wanted to know about my projects. And I think an advantage that I did have was that because I come from an industry that is not very commonly known to the people in management institutes, they were not fully aware of it. And because of which they were not able to grill me a lot. So the conversations were very organic, because they were also inquisitive about what I was saying. So that is one takeaway that I had from
And
my
your
interviews.
leadership skills came through with your positions of responsibility in college and school, right?
Right. So I think I'd say that they did not come up in every interview. And I also have a background in classical dance. So that is something that came up. And I remember they even asked me technical questions based on, I am a Bharatanatyam dancer. So they asked me, like, what is the full form of Bharat? Like, where does the name derive from? And a lot of questions like that were asked. And I think this was the XLRI interview. So, and speaking of the XLRI interview, that interview was solely driven by, they asked me what are your hobbies, and I said that I am an avid reader, that I really like to read. And then for most of the interview, they were discussing books with me. So things like that also happened. And yes, leadership was also asked in a couple of interviews. But most of my interviews were about my industry and the kind of progress that it's making in India today.
Now, you have aced all these institutes, and it's a very difficult choice because there's hardly anything to choose between, let us say, IIM Kozhikode and XLRI. XLRI, in XLRI you have the choice of HR, which is the most sought after program in the country, and versus IIM Kozhikode. And we
Right.
were actually also discussing things, and you were actually mulling over it, and you must have been bombarded with advices from all sides. So finally,
So
how was
much
the
of it.
decision? Yes, how was the decision made?
Um,
Keeping
the
your
decision
interest in marketing in mind, in case
that
that's
is
where
what
marketing.
finally was
Mhm,
the deciding factor
mhm,
in my
mhm,
decision.
mhm.
I went through the HR curriculum quite extensively after I got the shortlist, and I enjoyed it. I found it very interesting. But then I got the option of going to IMK, and I knew that from there it would be much easier for me to experience marketing, or even if I don't choose that as a career option eventually, I would be able to experiment with it at a much earlier stage. And like you said, there wasn't really a difference between the stature of the institutes as such. And one more thing that I really did like about Kozhikode was the campus.
Campus, yes.
And I
Mhm.
really, really, I remember when I saw the pictures, I just fell in love with it right that instant.
Mhm.
So
It's
although that wasn't
almost
a
like a
very,
hill station, Ashna, I
it
can tell
is,
you. And it's a big change from Delhi, I can tell you. A lot of open
I can
spaces and
imagine,
greenery and yep.
right?
Mhm.
So those were, but essentially it was because I have a very, very keen interest in marketing. And even though I do have that, it wasn't entirely easy because, like you said, HRM at XLRI is the best the country has to offer. But I did make that decision finally.
So wonderful, great that you aced everything that you laid your hands on, and excellently done. Very well done. Hearty congratulations from the bottom of my heart, and there
Thank
are a
you
lot
so
of
much, sir.
takeaways from your journey that your juniors can pick up. I'm sure your success will inspire a lot of your friends and juniors to actually sort of take up whatever they want to do seriously. And so, best wishes for everything
Thank
you
you.
do, not just in the next 2 years. I'm sure that you would come out as one of the best all round students from IIM Kozhikode, but
Thank
even
you.
life beyond that, and for a stellar management career, Ashna.
Thank you, sir. And
I'm
I
sure
hope
you will go
that,
places.
sir, I hope that I keep getting guidance from you consistently all through
Be
because
in
it's,
touch.
I've discussed this profusely with my mother that I could not have done this without your guidance because that's actually when I started preparing and realizing that it's not the mountain that people make it to be. They literally make a mountain out of a molehill. Cat is not that difficult. So
Thanks a lot for your very kind words. I mean, deeply humbled by your kind words, and God bless, and keep going places, and be in
thank you,
touch.
sir.
And very proud to say that I have a student like you who has actually done so well, and who will continue to do well, and shine in the corporate world. All the
Thank
best
you,
in
sir.
life as a whole. Thank you so much,
Thank you so
and
much.
thanks for sharing your thoughts. And God bless. Do well. Thank
Thank
you.
you.